Amazing table, amazing discussion here today. So thank you all the panelists and the moderator for such an inspiring discussion. So if I try to summarize the topic of today, I think that I can say that the traditional or all and new space players, they all need to be creating new satellites, new constellations that will operate longer. I think that that was one of the concepts that was mentioned, that will need to operate longer. They need to maximize their potential, even thinking in introducing new concepts as sharing the satellites. And at the end, the main goal is to be created to provide solutions for the needs and the challenges of the customers. And I think that that's the core thing together with the sustainability of our sector.
And after this first discussion panel, now we've got the first talk, which is called Global Outlook on the New Space Economy. Just to think a little bit about that, we completely agree, I'm sure, that the new space is a revolution that is leading to the appearance of new players that are challenging the traditional government-based space industry. And it's nice because, as we've seen, it forces what we sometimes call old space, as they said, maybe it's not the best way to say it, like actors outside the new space ecosystem to change and to adapt to this new ecosystem. So what is clear is that new space is affecting everything. At the orbit, we've got these small satellites, constellations. At the launcher, we've got this micro-launcher segment, which is experiencing a boom. At the end user, we've got also these new applications, and all this is creating and generating an economical growth which drive innovation and in a variety of different industries. And to talk about that, today we invited Géraldine Naja. Géraldine is Director of Commercialization, Industry and Competitiveness at the European Space Agency. She holds over 30 years of experience within the European space sector, and she's currently responsible for elaborating and implementing ESA's industrial policies, conducting negotiations with industry, and managing procurement for all the agency's activities and programs. She's also responsible for boosting European space commercialization and business development through innovative programs, tools, and partnerships. So, as you can see, Géraldine is the perfect speaker to talk about the new space economy, so please give her a big round of applause.
Thank you very much, and first let me thank you for having invited me here. I understand this is now the 4th Congress here in Barcelona, and if you indeed double every year, I think you have to already think about next year's room. Having said that, as Raphael was saying, new space is often the word used by old space, so I'm a typical example for that. But I think it's a very good point that you made, that the challenges, first of all, is commercialization, not technology, even if technology has to deliver, but it has to be just good enough. It doesn't need to be super, very, very high tech. You have to deliver to the needs of the customer, which means you have to first identify the customer, I think. Second, quick to implement, quick to market. And then I would say, at the end, focus also on customers when you implement. So yes, I fully share your view, and I think you made an excellent summary. But let me start by saying a few words and a few figures about new space, even if nowadays it's very difficult to differentiate because established companies use new space approaches, and new space eventually becomes mature. So I think, in fact, in the end, everyone is doing new space. First of all, what do I see with this new space, or the way space is being done nowadays, is that there are so many opportunities. So many opportunities, thanks to, of course, the much lower launch costs, the higher frequency of launch opportunities, also leading to higher payload capacity. Also the fact that this new approach to space is really challenging the regulatory dimension of space. There were talks about debris. Of of course, debris removal. I think the very high number of satellites now in orbit, which is almost doubling or doubling every year, means that eventually we will all have to think together and act together on putting forward a proper regulation for space activities. But also many new markets, many new ways of doing things, space as a service, new markets such as in-orbit servicing, and also the environmental aspect, which is increasingly important. And of course, space as a sector is fundamental for addressing the green transition, but also we must make sure that the space infrastructure itself becomes more green, hence the look to green or electric propulsion. And these opportunities materialize. If you look indeed at the number of satellites launched from 21 to 22, it's a doubling, mostly, of course, with the constellations and primarily with Starlink. 95% of satellites launched are small sats. And another clear manifestation of this new approach is the private investment, which has been growing. However, when we say it has been growing, if you look at the figures, it has been decreasing in the world globally, including especially in the US, but it has been increasing substantially in Europe, which means that in Europe, there are still many opportunities for investment and many more investors. I think it's a good news, but of course, eventually, this will probably stabilize. And public space investment is not decreasing because of private space investment. Quite the contrary, it continues to grow. So definitely, this is a new era. And opportunities come with challenges too. And when I look at what's happening in Europe, for me, there are many challenges with this new way of doing space. The first one is, even if it has been increasing, there is still a deficit of private funding in Europe compared to especially the US, and a deficit of European investors. Also there, this is increasing. At ESA, we have now some 40 partners in our investor network, but there is still a big gap, let's say, with our international partners. Another thing which I see is that in Europe, we get the message, give us more contracts. Don't give us only grants or subsidies, give us contracts, because that's the way to make us grow in a proper way and in a competitive manner. Grants is just euros more on your bank account. Contracts means you can leverage this funding, you can go to the bank, you can go to the investors, and you can grow. So this is also one thing that we have to keep in mind when it comes to the way we do space in Europe. I mentioned it, public investment does continue to grow, and this is good also for these new actors. Because, as I say, first of all, these new actors need contracts. They need the public investment. Many of the very famous new space actors have actually started thanks to contracts with agencies. Suffice it to quote, of course, SpaceX and NASA. And this is why we believe at ESA, a public agency, a public-funded agency, that we have a role to play in encouraging, in promoting the growth, and in supporting the development of a European new space ecosystem. And yes, this is continuing to grow. Last year, our council at ministerial level was a big success with some 17% increase compared to the one before. And Europe remains at a relatively stable level of 14–15% of the public funding worldwide. Funnily enough, this was the case 30 years ago. This continues to be the case. Europe is representing 15% of public space funding. Private investment, I mentioned it already also, is growing, but mostly in Europe. It has really stalled and even decreased worldwide. Of course, let's say the economic health is partly due to that. I believe also maybe because there has been a very rapid and large growth in the US, and I believe that the largest opportunities have already been found and now they are stabilizing. I believe we are still in this phase of growth in Europe. Upstream overview, I continue with a few figures to set the scene of this new space word. As I said, many satellites launched, a doubling since last year, and well, a doubling from 21 to 22, and actually in 2019, I think there were some 400 satellites launched. So it is really a very fast growth. And the interesting thing is that when we look at Europe in this, I remind you that Europe is 15% of the public funding worldwide and some 10% of the private investment worldwide. Still, we managed to capture 19% of the manufacturing value of satellites. Of course, we don't do as many small satellites as in the US, but in terms of value, still we are very competitive. And it's even more impressive if you look at the manufacturing orders in 22. There, Europe is capturing 21% of the volume of the number of orders, but more importantly, 26% of the orders value. So this is also something where I think we must really take a little stop. Europe is highly competitive in space, and I believe that this competitiveness can only be boosted by the new way of doing space. And that is why, by the way, most of our large established companies, most of what we call our prime manufacturers, they also use a new space approach. They have evolved. They do things differently, and it helps them remaining in the course and continuing to be highly competitive. And when we look at the downstream, so the services and the applications of space, there it's even more striking. Europe is 1/4 of the global, let's say, downstream market, commercial downstream market. So we are also commercially competitive, which is very important. And out of that, you see that a very large proportion of the downstream sector revenues comes from navigation, and I'm happy that my friend and colleague Javier will address that later on. Last thing to set the scene is that the world is changing rapidly, and also new space inscribes itself in this global change. There is a huge rivalry in terms of space nowadays between US and China, where it used to be US and USSR at the beginning of the space era. Now it's clearly US and China, with also, of course, very large numbers of investment in technology in the defense sector, and also many regulatory measures, in particular protectionist measures. For what Europe is concerned, I think also this year I have seen a change, and I was happy to see it, and I think it's also remarkable, is that the excellence of Europe, in particular when it comes to earth science and to understanding and monitoring climate change, is becoming a worldwide recognition. And may I just take the examples of all the disasters we have witnessed in natural disasters this year. Everywhere in the European news, you hear about Copernicus, which has become a word reference for understanding and mitigating climate change. And I think this is a very strong, let's say, success of Europe on which we can build. And also, beyond US and China, there is a complete new era. I mean, new space is also about a multiplication of actors, of new approaches, of new ways of doing things, but also of actors, and we can see a multiplication of space actors worldwide. Many more countries becoming active in space, but these countries also have their own new space ecosystem. It is very clear, for instance, when you go to the UAE, they have a very, very dynamic new space ecosystem. So new space has become, let's say, it started clearly in the US, but now it is a global fact. Now, maybe you could say, but why should we adapt? Well, for me, beyond the figures that I mentioned, beyond, let's say, the facts, it is true that the new space approach brings us much more innovation and much more dynamism. And for me, this is the crucial factor. And as Raphael was saying, we must focus on commercialization. And we have the technology, we have the competences. Now we have to adapt, because perhaps we were not as spontaneously commercially driven as our transatlantic partner and competitor, but we have to adapt and adopt a more commercial approach. And there are so many new topics of interest in space. Of course, the LEO economy, and soon the lunar economy, which I think will become an entirely new market. Everything that has to do with in-orbit services, from active debris removal to, let's say, protecting the space infrastructure. Of course, continuing the space for the green transition, for climate change, and completely new services based on the future GNSS and telecom constellations. So this is also what NewSpace can bring us. And at ESA, we have started, as best as we can, to change the way we work, to support this new approach, and to support our industry. First of all, we consider that new space, indeed, is not only a question of companies. Nowadays, it is irrelevant to say there are new space companies, old space companies. It's an approach that is progressively being adopted by everyone. And as Raphael beautifully said, it is primarily customer-oriented, speeding up time to market, and getting a completely new approach to project management, but also to risk acceptance. When you look at what's happening with the Starship, and you see they will get there, but they accept that what happened a few days ago was not a failure, it was a step towards success. This is quite a different approach. Second, we have started to tailor our approach, indeed, for the commercial world. And I will just give two examples. The first one is the Copernicus contributing missions. So now, to complement the Copernicus satellites and the Copernicus constellations, we procure services from private EO data companies. And this is extremely efficient. And this, by the way, has led us, and has led my team in particular, to put forward a new contractualization scheme, allowing to place contracts much more rapidly with a fully digitalized procurement system. So it has also a very positive effect to the way we work. A second example I would give is, of course, Clear Space. We had Luc previously on the stage as well. This brilliant idea to do active debris removal in space, to have a completely new technology, but with a strong focus on commercialization, because there again, I believe this is an area where we will get private customers rather rapidly. We provide also commercialization services. We have in the room Philip Thomas, who is in charge of the Scale-Up program for commercialization at ESA, and we are providing a set of business incubation centers. We now have 29 of them, over 90 locations in Europe. We have PhilLabs, which bring together academia, industry, and agencies, technology brokers to do technology transfer from space to non-space, but also from non-space to space. We protect intellectual property. We do patenting and patent landscaping. We also set up the investor network with some 40 partners of private investors in Europe, and set up a marketplace in Scale-Up, bringing together potential customers and providers of new services in space. We also promote what we call, of course, the downstream sector with the BAS program, Business Applications and Space Solutions. There, the idea is quite simple. We have a number of existing space infrastructure. We can use it devising new solutions for the non-space sector. So we look at what space can do for health, for mobility, for energy, for connectivity, etc., but mostly bringing together Earth observation, navigation, and telecommunications data It used to be called the Integrated Applications Services, but I think you understand the point is to bring together existing data from existing infrastructure and find ways to use it to the service of Earth and of our planet. And I just mentioned it, a big part of the work is changing the way we work with companies. We are not fast enough, we are not agile enough, we are aware of that. It's a cultural change, it's a change of mindset at ESA, but I promise you it has been started and it will continue and it will succeed. It's just taking a bit of time, but we will succeed. We will succeed because we understand that this is for us the only way to be relevant, to be working with these companies. So time to contract, simplification of geo-return procedure. You know, geo-return is very disputed. Myself, I think if it is implemented with a view to competitiveness, it can be very helpful because it's very useful to get funding from our member states. And of course, when you invest somewhere, you want to get your return on investment. It's a natural thing that when you invest, you want return on investment. Private investors do, and member states do. But it's just a question that it should not drive the way the consortia are formed. What should drive the way the consortia are formed is competitiveness and competition. And, but then you must ensure a proper return to states. Also, we try to enlarge the scope of companies we work with. So we have a series of websites, of platforms to collect new ideas from different companies, also to help the new companies to work with ESA. We have the SME office, SME help desk. We have completely digitalized the call for tenders and the invitation to tenders and call for proposals. And we now have the platform for the new space entities, or let's say the newcomer entities is more appropriate. And finally, and I would say even more importantly, all the programs of ESA, which are very diverse. By the way, ESA is, I think, the only space agency in the world which addresses so many, all the sectors of space, from navigation to Earth observation, to launchers, to exploration, to technology, to science. All these programs of ESA now have a commercial side to it, now have a share of their activities which are dedicated to commercialization development, commercialization support. So in navigation, we have Navis. In space transportation, we have Boost. In Cubed for Earth observation, etc. You see the list. But it is a very, I would say, revealing fact of how much ESA has decided to wholeheartedly enter the commercialization world. And I will conclude with a few words on that. There was just 2 weeks ago in Sevilla a space summit. And there, in this space summit, which gathered the ministers in charge of space in the European countries, together also with the EU, there was a real change of paradigm, even if I don't always like this word, but it was clear. First of all, for the green, sustainable future of Earth, we now have what we call Space for Green Future Accelerator, which aims at making sure that Space for Green Future is not only an ESA matter or an EU matter, it is also a matter for the non-space sector, for the European Union, for all the also non-governmental organizations. It brings everyone together. So it's a new way to increase, let's say, the dimension of the use of space for the green future. And of course, we have the climate change service in Copernicus, but there are also in the BAS program, Business Applications and Space Solutions, a number of activities which are co-funded with industry and which are addressing the green transition. But the sustainable future is not only on Earth, it is also in orbit and beyond, because indeed the multiplication of the number of satellites and the multiplication, unfortunately, of the number of debris currently in orbit means that we have to be careful if we want to continue to use space for all our policies and for all our activities on Earth. And therefore, ESA has put together the Zero Debris Charter. It already has 40 partners. The goal is to have no more debris production as of 2030 from our activities. So I really welcome all the companies present here, all the partners present here to sign this Zero Debris Charter. Second change of paradigm is spaceflight. Spaceflight. You know that currently we have the International Space Station, and by 2030, more or less, the space station should start being decommissioned and should end its life. What happens next? There, Europe, in the Space Summit, has decided that next to the traditional partnership programs, with NASA in particular, for instance, the Gateway or Artemis, we will also look into the private procurement, the procurement of privately developed services for Europe. And we have this initiative, which we call the LEO Cargo Return Service. In the next 2 years, we shall prepare the possibility for Europe to procure commercial services to bring cargo to orbit and then back to Earth. And in 25, when we have the next meeting of ESA ministers to decide on new programs and activities, we will decide, we will ask them to decide, actually, how to continue with this. Should we have a continuation of private services for LEO cargo up and down, or should we go to crew also? Should we go to a crew vehicle, or should we even move to lunar services? So, and as I say, this is not, it doesn't mean that we shall completely do it using the procurement of private services, but in addition to what we do traditionally on exploration, we shall have this commercial dimension. And it does not stop to, let's say, exploration and low Earth orbit. It also goes, of course, to launchers. You know, right now, we have a deficit of launcher in Europe due to a number of, unfortunately, structural issues and geopolitical context. But the ministers in Sevilla have decided to, of course, stabilize the present, ensure that Ariane 6 Vega C will have a good scheme for exploitation and will be good launchers that can, in particular, serve the institutional market, but also can be competitive for the commercial market. But more importantly, I would say, open the door to the new privately developed launchers in Europe, who will be able to compete next to the publicly funded launchers to launch some small payloads. And to do that, we plan for a competitive process for the next generation of launcher using the European Launcher Challenge, which was announced in the Sevilla Summit and which we will start after the Ministerial Council in 25. And there, I would like to say, I'm extremely happy of the success of Miura and of PLD, not only because my grandmother was from Elche, this is another story, but I'm extremely happy because I think this is the first privately developed launcher that has succeeded. It will not be the last, so there will be heavy competition. I am convinced that next year we shall see already quite a number of small launchers privately developed in Europe having their maiden flight. And what I'm absolutely convinced of is that competition leads to competitiveness. So it can only help the existing launcher sector to be challenged and to see a new set of launchers competing. And I will just conclude by saying that organizations change when people do. ESA is going to rejuvenate. Already in my team, I'm happy to have a set of new people coming from different horizons, having experience with the new space or investor sector, and I think this is an asset for us. Also, our agency, by the end of this decade, will completely rejuvenate its staff due to the, let's say, pyramid of ages at ESA now. And I think this will transform ESA. We are working on a strategy 2040. I'm eager to see, I will be retired by then, but I'm eager to see what the space sector will look like 2040, but we are building it today. Thank you.